Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the beautiful Turkey Thicket Recreation Center in Ward 5. I'm joined by members of my public safety team as well as community members from all 8 wards. Also joined today by the council member for Ward 2 and the council member for Ward 5. I especially want to acknowledge Council Member Pinto, who chairs the committee on public safety in the judiciary, and Councilmember Parker, our host council member. So I think I'm just going to say a couple of things about public safety as Assistant Chief Parsons to give a quick update on investigations that we talked about last week. Continue to ask the community for its support in all of the lookout information that we have put out over the last several days to make sure that people who have committed violent crimes in our community are being held accountable. So with that, I know where we talked last week, we were also in Ward 5 at the Phelps School in the neighborhood surrounding Phelps about making sure that part of our public safety ecosystem, and those are all of the laws that keep us safe, are what we need. We know for sure that residents are demanding that we hold violent criminals accountable for their actions, and that we put an end to people who are traumatizing our communities. The criminal activity occurring in our neighborhoods is unacceptable. We've talked many times that opinions certainly or approaches to how we keep our communities safe can vary. And we have engaged and will continue to engage in a rigorous process with members of the council to advance a legislation that closes the gaps. We are very grateful to Councilmember Pinto, who introduced emergency legislation last week that includes several key proposals from my Safer, Stronger legislation. And I'll leave that to Councilmember Pinto to talk about, but needless to say, it includes common sense solutions to move us forward in closing the gaps that we think are preventing us from holding people accountable. So you've heard me say many times that I pledge to the residents of DC to take action in any way that I think, whether it's legislatively or whether it's programs and services in the government, whether it's talking to others, be it federal or court resources that are a part of the system that keeps us safe. So with that, let me turn quickly to Assistant Chief Parsons for a quick update, and then I'll turn to the council members. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to provide a brief update in a couple of the cases that we've talked about. The first case I want to start with is the murder of 25-year-old Maxwell Emerson of Crestwood, Kentucky, that occurred Wednesday, July 5th at 8 a.m. in the 600 block of Alumni Lane at Catholic University. As you're aware, we disseminated images on Friday, and I want to make sure that the public has the opportunity to view these images. Please review these images carefully. The next case that I would like to just quickly touch on is the homicide of 31-year-old Nasrat Ahmad Yar of Alexandria, Virginia. That occurred just after midnight on Monday, July 3rd in the 400 block of 11th Street Northeast. On Thursday, we released video of the suspects. I'm sure people have seen this video. Again, I want to encourage everybody to please view this video, and anyone with any information, please reach out to us. Our detectives continue to investigate both of these cases, and I can assure you both of these cases are progressing. We're grateful for our partners in the community that have stepped up and came forward with information on each of these cases, and we encourage anyone else with information to do the same. Anyone who has any information is encouraged to call our 24-hour command center at 727-9099, or you can text a tip to us at 50411. The Metropolitan Police Department offers a reward of up to $25,000 for the arrest and conviction for those responsible for each homicide here in the district. In both of these cases, I want to highlight that the presence of cameras and detectives being able to obtain that footage has greatly assisted us in progressing the investigations. I also want to remind everybody again and encourage them to take advantage of the district's private security camera rebate program for residents and businesses. The last case I want to talk about involves 4 suspects that are currently wanted on a district court indictment. As you're aware, previously on June 27th, MPD, along with our federal partners at the DEA, ATF, FBI, and the IRS, arrested 12 alleged members of a violent drug trafficking organization known as the Kennedy Street Crew, or KDY, on charges including conspiracy to commit drug trafficking, possession of firearms in furtherance of drug trafficking, possession of firearms by persons convicted of a crime, assault with a dangerous weapon, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. In addition to these arrests, law enforcement officers and agents seized multiple firearms and narcotics. The Metropolitan Police Department seeks the public's assistance in locating the 4 additional suspects who are wanted pursuant to a United States District Court indictment for similar charges that I just mentioned. Those 4 suspects can be seen in this photo. They've been released on Friday in a press release. They are 24-year-old Warren Fields of Oxon Hill, Maryland, 19-year-old Keon Brown of Northwest D.C., 18-year-old Jovan Williams of Northeast D.C., and 27-year-old Jawan Demetrius Clark of Northwest D.C. If anyone has any information as to the whereabouts of these suspects, they should call us at 202-727-9099 or send us a message by text at 50411. And if by chance any of the suspects see this, I would encourage them to turn themselves in. They can do so 24 hours a day at any one of our 7 police districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And we will release again on all of our social media platforms in the government the lookout information that the Chief just reviewed. And again, I want to thank MPD, FBI, U.S. Attorney for their investigations into the drug and violent ring that the Chief just described. So with that, let me turn now to Councilmember Pinto, followed by Councilmember Parker.
Thank you so much, Mayor Bowser, and I want to thank also Deputy Mayor Pia and Chief Parsons and Director Freeman, my colleague, Councilor Parker, who are here today in our shared effort to address the crisis of crime and violence that we're experiencing right now. I think it is no secret to those of you in this room and the public that we are in a state of emergency right now, where we're experiencing a 20% increase in homicides that we've seen from this time last year. And like in any emergency, we have to act like it, and we have to act urgently as a government to address the problem that we're seeing. And I'm very appreciative to Mayor Bowser for her leadership in introducing a piece of legislation, Safer Stronger bill, last month, with a lot of great provisions in it to address what we're seeing in our communities right now with crime and violence. I introduced a piece of legislation several weeks ago for accountability and victims protection. And 2 weeks ago at this point, we had a 12-hour hearing where over 170 witnesses signed up to testify on Mayor Bowser's legislation and share some really strong ideas, supports, concerns about how to make it even stronger. And I was pleased last week to introduce an emergency bill for things that I believe will drive down some of the violence that we're seeing right now, things that cannot wait until the fall. Things like ensuring that people can be held pre-trial for committing crimes of violence in the adult system, to make sure that our juveniles can be held pre-trial for things that we're seeing a lot of in our community right now, like carjacking, like attempted homicide, like assaults with a deadly weapon, and making sure we're being responsive to that emergency. Things to make sure that the mayor has more authority around the private security camera program so that our residents can access these programs, making sure it's a standalone offense to discharge a firearm in the public, ensuring that our police officers are empowered to engage in a vehicular pursuit if there are public safety dictates that they must, and making sure that if somebody has an ankle monitor, for example, and is out on pretrial, that if they go out and commit another crime, that location information is admissible in court. These are just some of the provisions in the emergency package, but we believe in working in partnership with the mayor, with my council colleagues, with our law enforcement partners, that they will make a difference this summer in driving down crime and violence. And I think it's important that we recognize that everybody in government right now is working together on this. This is an emergency. We all are recognizing the importance of pursuing it as an emergency, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get this emergency package passed tomorrow so that we can see a reduction in crime this summer and keep working on our larger comprehensive goals around preventing violence, driving down violence, and ending cycles of violence. So happy to answer any questions folks may have once we get there, but thank you again, Mayor Bowser, and all of our colleagues for working so collaboratively in this process so we can get something passed that will make a meaningful difference tomorrow. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome again to Ward 5. I want to thank the mayor for holding this opportunity to answer questions, and I want to thank Councilmember Pinto for her leadership in ushering forward legislation that I'm hopeful will pass tomorrow. Feeling pretty good about it. What I can say is that there were many phone calls this weekend hammering out language, making sure that the emergency legislation is in the right place and addresses colleagues' concerns. And I just again want to thank Councilmember Pinto for her leadership. One of the things I wanted to point out is that there are bright spots. We heard last week from Commander Altieri that in the 5th District, we are seeing a decrease, I think, on the trends of 38% in homicides year to date. And why do I say that? Is because while we are taking this action tomorrow, that I too hope will help drive down the violence that we're seeing across the city, there are bright spots that we can learn from and I hope scale across the city. I also just want to note that tomorrow's legislative meeting, where I'm hopeful that the emergency will pass, is only one necessary step to turning around the violence that we're seeing play out in our streets. It will take the council working closely with the executive, as well as when cases reach the courts, charges and indictments coming down, and people being held accountable for the harm that they cause. So again, I want to thank the mayor for partnering with the council here. I want to thank Councilmember Pinto for her leadership in making sure that the emergency not only addresses the violence that we're seeing, but also reflects the concerns of our colleagues. And I too look forward to answering any questions you may have, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue to see progress in Ward 5. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And speaking about bright spots, I think what DPR is doing in our city is nothing short of amazing. So I want to thank you, Thene, and the whole team at DPR. Tell us how many kids you have.
So this mega campus, Turkey Thicket, we currently have about 150 youth. We have 2 discovery camps, 2 Little Explorer camps. We have an esports camp, which is new, and that's for the tweens. And we also have aquatics happening, and we have a senior program. So if you walk around the campus, you will see all ages from 0 to however age. But we're just so excited. And this summer, we've been intentional about programs and things that we've launched. We have the late night hypes and the late night drips, and they're very, very popular. Our young people are inboxing us and asking for more. So with intentionality, we're increasing programs. We've partnered with young people and asked them, what is it that you would like to see, that you would be willing to participate in? And so we're responding to that. And so thank you, Mayor Bowser, for your investments through Rec for All. We're sending 1,000 young people to Camp Riverview, which is in Scotland, Maryland. It's completely free. They're gone for a week. We feed them, we take care of them, and make sure that they have exposure to great opportunities. Also, learn to swim here at Turkey Thicket, please. It's very, very important. If you have not, let's get your children involved. We're eager to serve. So thank you so much, Mayor Bowser.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we'll take a few questions, and I know that Deputy Mayor Appiah is eager to answer a lot of your questions. We're going to start with the press, and then I'll make time for community questions. Right here?
Peace and blessings.
Peace.
This is for Councilmember Parker. If you can just, sir, elaborate on the kinks and whatever issues were being hammered out this weekend as it relates to the emergency legislation.
I will let Councilmember Pinto speak to more of the specifics. I would say for me, I personally wanted to better understand the clauses within the emergency legislation relating to pretrial detention, both for juveniles and adults. And I believe we reached a middle ground as it relates to juveniles. So as to address concerns that we might be casting too broad of a net that might lead to young people that make minor mistakes ending up in our criminal justice system. Again, Councilmember Pinto can speak to more specifics, but that was my personal concern that I was happy to see the councilmember address.
Well, thanks, Sam. I had meetings with colleagues throughout the weekend, and I think my main takeaway was that a lot of people had questions as to how we came to each of these provisions, and I'm very pleased that most of those conversations were very productive and everybody agreeing that we have to do more to act urgently about public safety, and explaining to them the research and data and intentionality that went into each of those provisions. So I'd say that was the most productive part of those meetings. There were some other things that we worked out around pretrial for adults, for example, that there was initially a requirement that said a judge has to write their rationale for letting somebody out on pretrial release. We wanted to make sure that we weren't inadvertently causing any backlogs in the system, so that requirement is removed, for example. And as Councilor Parker mentioned, making sure that the crimes of violence that we are potentially holding juveniles for are targeted to what we're seeing in the community right now. Crimes like homicide, attempted homicide, carjacking, felony assault, assault with a deadly weapon that's not necessarily a gun, and with a gun, to make sure that we are being targeted and intentional with what we're passing tomorrow.
Okay. Press questions. Michael?
Yeah, following up on that question, are there amendments you're aware of, Councilmember Pinto, or were there concrete changes to the bill compared to what was introduced that resulted from that, or was there agreement that the bill hits the right notes for the most part?
My hope is that there will be no amendments to the bill tomorrow. What we circulated around 11:30 a.m. Is the final version that I think is in the right place, and that reflects a few of the changes that I just went over around the most violent offenses, as well as the not requiring a judge to issue a written opinion as to why they made the decision.
Group, and I'm a fourth-generation resident of Ward 5 in Brooklyn. The first part is, why isn't the U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves at these meetings? He's our federal prosecutor. Can we have him come with us when we talk about safety? A lot of this stuff are federal crimes. And the second is, a lot of the violence we have is caused by housing instability. We have being pushed on a 310 condo unit right here in front of Turkey Thicket, the Brooklyn Lanes, and the developer only stopped after there was like grassroots protests by individuals. They were just pushing this development with no neighborhood notification, violation of DOB and law. And it's going to be 320. You have Turkey Thicket. This is the center of our community. You have the Brooklyn Middle School where President Biden and Kamala Harris visited. And nobody wants this new condo here right on our doorstep. And it took, next door and going on social media to start.
I'm not quite sure I get the nexus that you're talking about, but okay, we're talking about safety. I'm happy to have somebody talk to you about the development you don't want. We typically, we sometimes invite the U.S. Attorney to our press conferences, and likewise when he hosts press conferences, he frequently invites MPD. I think you were together last week, in fact, and we do invite him from time to time. Yes, Martin.
So earlier, when you introduced your version of the bill, you also had 2 mayoral orders that dealt with, I think, Deputy Mayor for Education. There was another Deputy Mayor regarding kind of policy changes that could be made there. I was just curious for an update there. And then relatedly, there was your summer crime initiative, or whatever the name was, that was unveiled a couple months ago. I'm curious if you guys are seeing any sort of...
Sure, I'm going to ask the Deputy Mayor to speak to both.
So with the mayor's order, which was introduced the same day, May 15th, there was direction by the mayor to several of the deputy mayors, myself, Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure, basically all of us, because we're looking across the system. And so there's been a lot of work done. There's initial plans that have been drafted within the 45-day, where there was a lot of work between the deputy mayors. And so that's been presented, and we're working through kinks because we want them to be operational and real. And so, the mayor is clear we're a very transparent and accountable government. And so once they're at a place where we're ready to introduce, absolutely we'll share. The second question you asked was about Focus Patrol. And so we absolutely will do an update on Focus Patrol. I think one of the things Councilmember Parker mentioned was last week when Commander Altieri spoke about reductions in Ward 5, he was specifically talking about in some of the Focus Patrol areas. And so we are certainly seeing reductions, really good reductions, which we expected when we do intelligence-led policing. And so we'll share that information and data as well because we started to generate that. And we're happy to do an update on that.
Mayor, I'm wondering if you and the chief could both comment on Chairman Mendelson's recent comments he made to Channel 5 saying, and I quote, "You can get away with murder in this city." He expanded on that this morning at his briefing where he pointed to closure rate statistics, that's what he was referring to, that if you look at, not UCR data, but if you look at closure rates for this year for murders committed in year, that the closure rates have been going down, that they stand at about 35%. And so he's saying, most of the people are getting away with murder in DC. Just your comments both on the chiefs on the closure rate for homicides, but then the fact that the chairman of the council who went on Capitol Hill and said that there's no crime crisis is now saying you can get away with murder in this city.
I'm not going to pay too much attention to asinine statements, but I am watching what he does. And tomorrow he needs to go in the chamber and vote for Brooke Pinto's emergency without amendment. If he's concerned about crime, as we all are, we need to make sure when the police say we need more police, you don't defund them. When the police say they need certain policies and procedures to hold people accountable, you support them. So I'm not going to pay attention to a Friday night. I'm going to give him the benefit of doubt. Maybe it was after a late dinner or something. But we're rowing in the same direction. You notice this? I got these 2 council members. We're singing from the same songbook. He needs to do the same.
He supports the legislation.
Good.
Chief, can we get...
Oh, I'm sorry. Back to your point. I'm actually going to ask Deputy Mayor Pia to talk about just where MPD is, but I gave that kind of intro because all of the things that it takes for our police to solve crimes, and you're not going to hear me say that we don't want every person who uses a gun convicted, period. Every person who uses a gun should be convicted. If you're even carrying a gun that you shouldn't have, there should be justice. And so that's what we talk about every single day, and we work very hard on making sure all of the pieces are in place to do exactly that. Let me ask Deputy Mayor to talk about where MPD is.
Sure. So, as the mayor said, right, like we are committed to justice, and that's what MPD is committed to. And so, our detectives and officers are working every day to make sure that what is presented is cases that can hold up. And so, while we're going to work as speedily as possible, it's also important that we work correctly and rightly and present cases that actually bring justice for victims. Right? And so when it comes to the actual closure rates for the Metropolitan Police Department, across category, whether it's robbery, assault with dangerous weapon, homicide, MPD's closure rates are above the national average. There's no question about that. That is a fact, right? So the chairman referring to whether cases are closed, we want cases closed as quickly as possible. I think he's referring to within the year. You cannot get away with murder in the District of Columbia. The Metropolitan Police Department and everybody up here is committed to making sure that justice is served in as expeditious a time frame as possible. And so based upon our closure rates, we think we're doing that, but we will always work with the council on whatever resources we believe will help to speed up and make sure that the Metropolitan Police Department is able to present good cases that prosecutors are then able to bring to conviction. Sure.
When you say, one, that the MPD's closure rates match up above the national average, are you speaking specifically about the UCR data for homicide? Okay, so let's talk about the data that the chairman is talking about. Is he correct when he quotes a number that only 35% of the homicides that are committed are closed within the year that they're committed?
I don't have that number, and so I'm happy to present that to you, but again, right, like I'm not sure that. Sure, we can turn to him and do that, but what I'll say is this, that what's most important is that justice is served, right? And so we can talk about 35%, we can talk about that, in fact, as the mayor said, right, like our staffing is where it is, right? And so we're going to make sure that the Metropolitan Police Department has every resource necessary to close cases as expeditiously as possible and make sure that prosecutors are able then to get convictions.
Thank you, Mayor and DM. I echo the comments that the mayor and DM have made. And Mark, to your point about closure rates, so let's talk about closure rates. As we all know, there's a lot that goes into a case closure. Clearly, when you have a case that happens December 31st, you're not going to close it that same year. Our detectives put a lot of effort into these cases. As you've heard about the public safety ecosystem, that is true. It exists in case closures as well. We work closely with our partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office when we present cases, and we have to present a case that is going to make it from arrest to a successful prosecution. We can't just go out and arrest someone to close a case. That's not what we do. So a case has to be built. And when you talk about closing a case in the same year, that's not a stat that really shows the whole message, because we know cases close in their own time. We'll close cases this year from prior years. Every investigation is different. There's no way for me to tell you or put a timeline on a case. I can't tell you that, hey, this case will be closed next week. It depends on the investigation, the challenges in the cases, and what we have to do to bring it to closure. So saying that, these number of cases have not been closed this year is we're comparing apples to oranges to how we keep stats and how we do business. And let me say before I stop, the men and women that serve as detectives here at MPD are some of the hardest working people I've ever met. They're the finest detectives in the world. We have other agencies that come to us all the time that look at how we do business, how we operate, how we do things. These folks give up sleep, they give up time with loved ones, they give up times at home just to get the job done. Sometimes we got to say, hey, go home and get some rest and come back tomorrow. They put everything they have into closing these cases. And as was said earlier, I can tell you, because it's been my responsibility since 2016, that MPD's closure rates in violent crime typically are well above the national average, to include homicide. I'll also say that I think, personally, the easy way out is to point fingers at someone else about what's going on or when there's a problem, but that's not what we're about at MPD. We're about rolling our sleeves up. We're about getting to work. I'm personally about leading the men and women that I'm responsible for and ensuring that violent offenders are held accountable when they commit crimes in our city. You can't get away with murder here. We will catch you. And the last thing I would say about that is what's not helpful is when we do hold violent offenders accountable is the courts let them out because our judges don't have the discretion they need, which is why instead of blaming, I support legislation that the mayor has proposed to keep our community safer.
And I think you probably also heard in those remarks that we all have a role to play. I frequently send in on a lot of briefings about homicides in the district, and I am struck by how important video evidence is to closing cases and to closing them quickly. For many years now, I started a program for all of us to be able to have cameras on our homes and to be able to share that video with the police when needed. On our public transit systems, there's cameras everywhere, so if there are crimes committed, there's frequently lookout information that we can put out and put out quickly. The public also has a role to play when you're called for jury duty. Anybody been called for jury duty lately? Okay, we need good people to make themselves available so as the courts get caught up with all of the cases that there are Washingtonians who are willing to serve. Yes, Sam.
So Mayor, recently, basically when members of the media asked you about the crime, situation, something's going to, you say, pass my bill, have them pass my bill. Do you think if this bill passes, as it seems it will pass, that we're going to see some dramatic change?
I think that we're going to be safer because people who are committing violent crime won't be on the street to commit more violent crime. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you exactly what that means in terms of numbers, but I can tell you that individual who committed a violent crime who's being held is not in Brookland or Fort Totten or Colonial Village or Anacostia or College or Congress Heights committing a crime. I can tell you that. I can't tell you that now.
And I asked the chairman about this, and he was saying he doesn't think
listen, I'm not going back and forth with the chairman. I'm not going to do it. What we got to do, Sam, right now, this is what people are concerned about. They're not concerned about he said or she said.
Yeah, but it's still a point. He's saying that you can get much more of an impact with an arrest survey rather than with your bill.
I don't know if that's what he said, but I can tell you that, yeah, I'm for more arrests being made for people who are committing crime. I can agree with that. I do agree with that. But having an arrest and having somebody walk out the door who was violent to turn around and be violent again doesn't make sense. Again, talk to this woman because she's making sense. You want to know? She's responsible. She's the chair of the committee, and she's advancing. Also, remember what the chairman said. Now you got me into it. Here you go. He said, we're not going to do anything this summer. Tomorrow, they will be voting on the main tenets of my legislation by emergency, as they should. All right. Yes, yes, and yes. Ma'am, and then you, sir, and then you. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you with the press? Okay, and then Stephanie, you're next. Okay.
And I was just wondering, because after hearing the comments from the council members today, I'm hearing words like crisis and emergency, and we weren't really hearing those words before. So I was wondering if you could characterize, council members are welcome to answer as well, what publicly is kind of seeming like a 180 on behalf of the council here.
I will turn to the members of the council.
I would not characterize it that way. I can only speak for myself. But when we have members of our community being shot and killed at rates that we haven't seen for 20 years, that's an emergency, period. That was an emergency several months ago. That's an emergency today. I am pleased that my colleagues do seem collectively to understand that this is an emergency and a crisis and that we have to act. I do just want to note, if I may add to Mark's question and some of the comments about case closure rates, that's why the need to close cases is exactly why MPD and the U.S. Attorney's Office have been such instructive partners in this legislation, so that it includes pieces that will help them close cases even more effectively than they're doing now, to make sure that they can pursue cases in vehicular pursuit, to make sure that they can have evidence be admissible that otherwise wasn't, to make sure that there's a standalone offense with the discharge of firearms into the public. And so all of those pieces, we're all on the same team here, that we have to do more with public safety, and the police are working very hard to close these cases, which is exactly why they were in the best position to help partner on what gaps they need to do even more of that. And so this again doesn't have to be an either or proposition.
Stephanie, sorry, which changed that we're now willing to admit that it's an emergency that we weren't 2 months ago?
I will just say, as the chair of the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, my view on this has been consistent, and I am pleased that it seems our colleagues are all in agreement that there is a crisis and that we have to act.
The comment from the chair, which I understand you've made a few responses to already, but the comment from the chair was that your office and police have not recently gone to him and identified the supports that are needed in order for police, for detectives to be able to close the case rate. We know about the funding that was moved in 2020. We know about the battle that you had with Charles Allen in terms of funding police. But I want to ask specifically with the plan moving forward, if the chair is saying that your office and police have not gone to him to ask what more resources or talk about more resources are needed in order to address crime, is that correct? Is that true?
No,
and is
that's
there a
not
plan
correct.
to move forward in terms of closing the case rate and the support that MPD
We
needs
have
to do
moved
that?
a comprehensive piece of legislation. I just moved a budget that also included resource requests, reorganizations, all that have to do with public safety. So that's the language that we use to get resources from the council. We advance legislation or we make budget proposals. So I think it would be, again, not accurate to say that we're not active in this space with the council.
And with regard to the legislative proposals that have been made, especially the emergency ones, right? That's what we're here talking about. Are you aware that any of them would have directly impacted any of the high-profile murders that we've covered recently in the city?
I don't know how to answer that question, other than to say they're focused on what we see as gaps in the law.
One more, please.
Yep.
With regard to the DC pursuit policy, what about the millions of dollars in lawsuits that are still in place that have not been handled? How does that address what has been going on in the city?
I'm not sure what lawsuits you're referring to. What is she? Do you know what she said? Oh.
I mean, Deputy Mayor may have other things to add. I would say cases that have been brought against people who have violated the police policy. What we're talking about is ensuring that the police policy is clear and is not being interpreted, which the current state of affairs is that we're worried that the interpretation could be so limiting that would disallow them from engaging in a chase. And so I do think it's important in crafting policy and changes here that we don't seek to address a problem by a different type of solution. We need a strong MPD policy that's taken seriously and enforced when there are violations, and that's what's gone on.
Okay. Sadler, Seagraves, and then I'm going to the community.
Considering the changes that Councilmember Pinto proposed in her emergency version of your bigger, safer, stronger bill, you might say, looking namely at IRA and previewing the fall, would you consider adjustments to the permanent bill that you made based on the emergency she's introducing, or do you plan to kind of forge ahead with what you introduced?
I support the council member's emergency. I support Safer Stronger.
Your initial proposal brought during the hearing, for example?
Well, this is a legislative process, Michael. I think what we're seeing is evidence of it. And yes, of course, I would work with the council on advancing the rest of the bill. Yes.
Mayor Bowser, tomorrow the council will also vote on authorizing the Inspector General to hire an outside law firm to further investigate the allegations against your former deputy mayor. You came out pretty firmly against that the other day. I'm wondering, if it passes tomorrow, will you veto that? Will you let it go into effect without your signature, or what will you do if the council passes that? And I'd like to ask the two council members how they plan to vote tomorrow.
Sure. So first of all, the Inspector General already has the ability to investigate, so I don't know why an emergency is necessary to give the Inspector General the authority to investigate. That's the whole purpose of the Inspector General's office. So I don't know that the legislation is necessary. And so then I go to, if it's not really actually necessary or practically necessary, is it just politically expedient for some members of the council? And if the answer to that is yes, I would not be likely to support it. I think you know, and I think everybody knows, that I sent over to the Inspector General weeks ago now a letter asking him to address those things that the MOC found were outside of their scope for a sexual harassment investigation. So the bottom line here is this: the MOC's investigation, and all the members say they think it's credible. The MOC is I think 30+ year lawyer for the district. Okay, he's been doing this for 30 years, before me, before the AGs, before all of that. And his office issued a report that substantiated the chief claims of the complainant. So I'm not really sure what else you're going to have an investigator look into. The claim was made for sexual harassment, that it was substantiated. The person who is responsible is no longer with the government. So I don't know what else the investigators, but I trust that the Inspector General will do his job and find out anything that wasn't covered by the MOC. I don't know that telling him, which I'm not really sure the council can make him do anyway, to hire somebody, to pay them astronomical amounts of money to come to the same conclusions. But I suppose the council will do what it will do. Here's the bottom line. We don't tolerate sexual harassment in our workplace. It's very serious. People should be able to come to work, do their jobs, move ahead, transfer, advance, without having the threat of being harassed in their workplace. And I'm committed to making sure that that is true across DC government. It should also be true for the agencies that don't report to the mayor, like the council, like the AG, like the IG. Everybody across DC government should have that expectation.
I appreciate that answer, but I'm not sure if it answered my question. Will you veto it if it passes?
I won't veto it.
Will you allow it to you won't veto it. I appreciate that. Can I ask the council members how they'll vote tomorrow on those? Thank you.
Just like in 2019, when my predecessor had violated many codes of conduct, ethics, laws, there was an independent investigation. I do support, given that we are talking about, other than our elected officials, the most senior person in our government, that an independent investigation is warranted, and I will be supporting Councilmember Nadeau's bill tomorrow.
I too will support the emergency legislation. And I just want to say that I trust that we all take sexual harassment very seriously. And so in this case, it's not just a matter of bringing justice for the women who have accused among the highest ranking government officials of sexual harassment, but it's also giving the appearance that this case was investigated thoroughly, fairly, in order to bring about safety for future women that may want to bring such a claim. And so I think it's not a matter of price tag here, but it's around safety and making sure justice is brought in this case. And I want to applaud Councilmember Nadeau for pushing this forward.
So, not to beat a dead horse, but perhaps we are beating a dead horse. And I want to be clear about appearances. A claim was made to me. Within 10 days, there was resolution and investigation happening in this case. I think that's what the people of the District of Columbia expect of me as their mayor, regardless of where the complaints came from or who they were about. I acted. So if we want to pay more, and I do sometimes think it's about price tag because I've seen how these investigations go. But more than that, if we want to have our employees endure another investigation to not get a different result, then, you know, that's the decision for the council. Anything else? Yes.
How quickly do you all actually think passing this emergency legislation will have an impact on this city?
I think it's going to have the impact the second a judge decides that somebody who has committed a violent crime should be held until their trial. That's when it's going to have an impact, that second. Your question.
Good evening. I'm a 73-year-old Washingtonian, also a Vietnam veteran. I know what it feels like to get shot. Take a look. Half my gut gone. But I believe in occupying the mind and the time of young people. There are things that we can do as programs, be creative, like taking celebrities, bring them in.
I'm sorry, say again, about being creative?
Being creative
okay.
and bring celebrities in and have them do little programs for contests that would get these young people for tennis shoes, which they're very fond of. They love them. And maybe get them off of the street and come to these places and do that with shows that we do, like creating a hip-hop recording studio in one of these things. They bring them in there. At least you know where they're at.
Yes.
So you have kind of control of it. But at the same time, I'm looking for what we're saying today about accountability for these people to be arrested. But I've not heard anything about accountability for the people who are bringing these guns to the city, how these guns are getting here.
We talk about that all the time. But it's not, we talk about it all the time, and there are different approaches to keep them from coming to Virginia. We can talk about that, but that doesn't stop me from saying, why are you shooting your neighbors? Why are you going on a bus and having a shootout? Why are little kids getting caught up in the crossfire? We have to have some personal accountability. Yes, I'm concerned about people trafficking guns, but I'm more concerned, right, in this moment, that we're exercising some personal accountability. That's for the person who's carrying the gun. That's for the household that knows a gun is in their house. That's for the person having the party and there's an altercation at their event. That's for all of us. So it's not enough to say, and Lord, I've been talking about keeping guns out of DC, changing our law, having the courts strike down our laws, all of that. We attack it from all sides. But we gotta attack the personal accountability in our neighborhoods of people using guns. We have to. Yes, okay, community questions now, yes.
This has to do with cameras.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm an advocate for seniors.
Yes, ma'am.
Volunteer with the Department of Aging and Community Living, member of the Bernice Fontenot Senior and the DC Senior Cameras Club. So I'm an advocate for seniors. The way the program exists now, as I understand, you apply for it using your own funds and then get reimbursed. Initially, it was under another program where your home was inspected for other things and the camera was involved. What I'm hearing is that it's an expense. And what I would like to see, what can be done.
I think we have it both, ma'am. We still have the rebate?
Referring to, there was a senior voucher program under Safer at Home where that you could get the voucher, and that's absolutely as it's not in place currently, but we are absolutely hear you and are willing to look at how we can make sure that our seniors are able to, we understand that some are not in a position to put money forth ahead of time and reimburse. So we'll absolutely look at that, and part of this legislative proposal is so that we have some flexibility to really look at and expand how we're utilizing the program. So we will look at that because we did expand Safer at Home, so we'll look again at the senior voucher program.
Would that be for this year?
Sure.
The funds?
Safer at Home is already in this year.
I know that. I'm talking specifically about the cameras. So when will that be available?
I commit to you that I'll go back and speak with the director, Hines, and look at what is available in Safer at Home. And if we're able to do it this year, we absolutely will look at that. And if not, we will continue to make sure that we want everyone to have cameras. So you have our commitment that we'll look at that.
But I want to be clear, ma'am, a lot of seniors are taking advantage of the camera rebate program. Okay, all right. So we'll keep working on that. It's the voucher program, and we did create a voucher some years ago, so let me figure out where it is. Okay, last two.
Okay, hi. I'm Commissioner Robbie Woodland for Ward 8. I thank you so much, Madam Mayor and Ms. Lindsay Appiah, for this legislation. This is what myself and my collective, Sandra Seegers, have been fighting for. Also, thank you, Ms. Brooke Pinto. One of the things I did want to ask a question about, though, because I didn't see it in your legislation, so excuse me if I overlooked it, but one of the problems that we have over in Ward 8 with our youth is being involved with CSOSA, with their ankle monitors. They're out committing crimes, and their ankle monitors have died months ago. And then there's no follow-up to bring them back, to recharge them, or follow up to see where these youth are. So we've been having problems with that issue, especially when we talk to the probation officer, get a body attachment warrant, and the judge would just dismiss it. Like one of the youth that we was working with, 16 years old, in June, went over to Oxon Hill and shot at a detective, and then that led back over to 13th Street Southeast around Congress Park, and they were arrested and apprehended then. But if we would have gotten a hold of him a lot earlier, we could have prevented it.
So his ankle bracelet did work or didn't work?
No, it didn't work.
It did not.
And,
I got it.
And he had it on for months.
Okay.
And he was going unmonitored. So that's one of the problems that we're having over in our ward.
Okay.
With a lot of the youth that commit crimes, they're already committed to CSOSA, but there's no follow-up with monitoring them.
Well, we do spend a lot of time working with our federal partners. In the case of youth, it's the courts. Well, it's the courts, and for adults, it's CSOSA, on really making sure that we are able to really supervise people. And I'll be honest, I have some concerns about it. We much rather have the young people supervised by DYRS, where we have a little bit more visibility. I'm grateful, however, that Councilmember Pinto's legislation is going to do something that we've been trying to do with the council for 5 years, and that is to be able to use that GPS data in proceedings so that the courts have access to it. So if we know that your ankle bracelet shows that you were fleeing a scene, then that can be admissible as well. So this is very important for us to be able to do. I also think some years ago we made tampering with the bracelet. We addressed that in the code. It currently is. So let's continue to follow up with CSOSA. Okay, Muhammad?
Yes, I'm Anthony Muhammad, the president of the 7th District CAC. I'm wondering what effect will this legislation have on the U.S. attorney who chooses not to prosecute cases like he did 67% of them he didn't prosecute? What effect will this legislation have on the U.S. attorney?
Well, let me just say this, that he's been supportive. He testified at the hearing. Let me get Brooke to say a little bit more about his testimony.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Mohammed. I think a lot, because the U.S. Attorney has been very a very instructive partner in helping us identify and work out additional gaps. And one of the things that they consider in pursuing a case is what is going to be their likelihood of success, as they have limited resources, like all agencies, over 1,000 misdemeanor cases alone a year. And so a lot of prioritization decisions are made, and one of those is, can we win this case? And so this bill seeks to make it more feasible for them to win cases by saying that you can use, as the mayor was just talking about, the GPS data that can be admissible in determining guilt if you go out and commit another crime, in making sure that it is an offense for strangulation, which they have been unable to make the case for now, which can often lead to other more fatal crimes, making a standalone offense for as a felony for discharging a firearm into the public. So they have been really instrumental partners, along with Mayor Bowser and colleagues and MPD, on making sure that we are moving forward an emergency that's going to put them in a better position to prosecute more cases effectively, which I think will see a improvement in the declination rate.
All right, Lou, you have the absolute last question.
Thank you, Mayor. For you, as well as the Deputy Chief and possibly Councilmember Pinto, as a follow-up to Mr. Mohammed's question about the U.S. Attorney sometimes not prosecuting cases. Court records clearly show that many of the hate crime cases which MPD brings up and charges someone, the U.S. Attorney's Office drops the hate crime designation, but usually continues to prosecute the underlying crime, mostly an assault. And I was wondering if the Deputy Chief might comment on whether the MPD is on the same page as the U.S. Attorney's Office when it comes to hate crimes.
Good afternoon. So the MPD does designate certain crimes as hate crimes when they meet our criteria for classifying those crimes as a hate crime. But because we designate it as such does not mean they will prosecute it as such. And unfortunately, I can't speak to their rationale or their thought process as to why they won't prosecute it as a hate crime. I would have to ask you would have to talk to the United States Attorney's Office about that.
All right, thank you, everybody. We'll stick around if there are any other questions, community questions. Thank you for being here.